Welcome to the new episode of the Sacred Cows of Coaching. In this episode, we are going to discover and explore the rule of having to pass over heavy stuff to therapy or therapy. So, Neel, over to you. Why did we pick this topic in this episode? Would you like to explain it to our listeners?
Thanks, Biran. And first of all, I'd like to say hello to you all. And Biran, it's great to be here with you again. And this is the first time we're introducing a sacred cow that has come from our audience. So, Hazel, thank you very much for sharing this topic with us about the heavy stuff and the so-called rule that coaches need to pass that on to therapists or move it to therapy. So, Biran, maybe a really interesting place to start here could be what are the views of the accrediting bodies around this?
That is a good place to start. And it is the root of this question, right? I can only answer from ICF and EMCC perspective. And they both refer in their ethical guidelines to this boundary between therapy and coaching. But they don't prohibit a coach staying with emotions. On the contrary, they say a coach should be able to hold the emotions, explore them to create awareness. And both agree that there is a boundary, but it is not about the heavy stuff, but it is about the client's relationship with them and the coach's intent in that conversation.
So tell me a bit more about that. So it's really clear that okay, emotions can be a part of coaching, right?
Yes.
So strong feelings, strong emotions can be part of it. The accrediting bodies say that's okay.
Yeah.
But tell me a bit more then about what would be the signs or the signposting, if you like, for us to know whether we were approaching that boundary or that threshold.
So both accrediting bodies agree on the coaching profession's focus about solution focus and future focus. But they
Okay,
also
so
don't,
time and solution.
yes, usually in overall coaching is future focused and also solution focused. But they don't deny the need to explore the past, which will create awareness about the future and also the present. Right? So they say it's okay to explore the past as long as you're not trying to diagnose or treat a clinical mental health situation.
Okay.
So maybe it's useful to do the distinction here in terms of clinical and not clinical. So the clinical might be how we can maybe recognize if it is clinical or not. So for example, depression, right? Clinical depression, it looks like something maybe your client can't get out of the bed even. So they're experiencing some physical things that impact their daily life. We need to recognize that. So coaches don't do anything with clinical mental health. But we know that people use these words a lot. I'm burned out. I feel overwhelmed. I'm experiencing fatigue. But they might not be clinical, right?
Yeah.
I feel high levels of stress, high levels of emotion, high levels of maybe sadness because of grief, and it is not a clinical situation. So that is the distinction between being clinical and not clinical. And the accrediting bodies are very clear about this. If there's a clinical situation, we need to refer them to therapy and therapists.
Right.
Right.
And Biran, it sounds like when you describe that clinical situation, there's almost a test for us as coaches to say, how resourced is this person? if coaching is about us enabling others to come to their own conclusions, their own insights by using their resources, but somehow they aren't resourced,
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
then that is a flag, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And I wonder if that is quite an easy one for coaches to navigate, right? If someone's showing up and they can't get out of bed in the morning, or someone has chronic anxiety and chronic worry and it sort of paralyzes them from doing things, it's an awful place to be.
Yeah.
We know that's not our territory.
Yeah.
And so that for me, there's a sort of really clear marker there. But of course, the world isn't always that neat, is
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. There is another marker, if I may share, which is the future focus. So if we are working with a client for a couple of sessions and we see that client is not making any progress, but instead going back to the same event or situation back every time in every session. Maybe in the session you recognize that you made a progress and they commit doing something, taking some actions. In the session everything seems like working, but then they come to the next session and you go back. They come to the third session, you go back. So if there is no future focus, solution orientation,
Mm,
it might be good to bring this back to the coaching session and maybe have a conversation with the client if therapy is good for them, right?
yeah,
Because one of the differences in coaching training and therapy training is coaches are not equipped to treat a past trauma. And this
right.
can be a trauma. The trauma doesn't have to happen in childhood. We know
Mm,
that from our clients, there's lots of workplace trauma as well happening.
mm,
We are not trained to
right,
treat that person in
right,
trauma. But it doesn't
right,
mean that we can't hold this emotional space for them.
right,
That is
right.
the difference between intention, the coach's
Right.
intention.
Yeah. And I guess that there is stuff that is off limits, and yet what we can do is help an individual to work in the here and now
Yeah,
and to make sense of their actions. I mean, I've had multiple conversations over the years where perhaps coaching has been an entry point.
exactly. Yeah,
Perhaps an individual has a certain sensitivity to the words counseling and therapy, and perhaps they might feel some stigma around those words.
yeah,
And yet, to come to a coach, be going to a coach means you feel well, you feel resourced in some way. And it can be the first time that people are really opening up and talking about themselves with another human being. And as a result of that, we can get to a point where they start to build their confidence to perhaps seek out other support they might need. And I remember for me, this was a really critical point in my development of sort of starting to get comfortable with perhaps the blurry lines between these two professional spaces. It was back in the pandemic where I did a lot of work with a national health system
oh, yeah,
and helping clinicians within that system to deal with burnout and the consequences of a very extreme set of pressures and circumstances on them. And what I started to become aware of was that there was so much emotion in the system at that point. Frequently, sessions would descend into tears, but also people were revealing much more
yeah,
and revealing much more about themselves as human beings, as opposed to them in the context of their professional identity.
yeah,
And from there came this belief that still is core to my coaching philosophy today, which is that I coach the whole person.
yeah,
And yet, what does that mean? It clearly does not mean that I am here to peel back the layers of the onion to understand how someone was formed, to understand potential past wounds. That is not what I mean by that. But what I mean is that that will be present
Yeah.
for people in their coaching. And what I have come to believe is really, really beautiful is the paralleling of coaching and therapy.
Yes. Yes. So I think that is one of the other important things to discuss here, because in the coach training that I deliver, uh, I get that question quite a lot. Like, can someone attend therapy and coaching at the same time? And the answer is yes. And what I do usually is, in our chemistry session, first session, if they disclose this type of information, I try to get that information. And if they disclose, I ask them to check with their therapists first. But I ask them, let them know that this is happening, this is what you want to have, also coaching, and see if that's okay for them, if they agree to them, or if they would bring another perspective to this, which I'm not aware of
Mhm.
as your coach. So I usually do that, and like, probably I have had these type of situations on top of my mind 3 times so far, and two of them said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead with the coaching as well." But there was one client, she wanted to get coaching. I noticed that it was not a good time, and she kind of agreed to check in with the therapist, and the therapist also said it is not a good time.
Mm.
And I can understand why the therapist also said that. One of the other things I want to maybe ask you, Neel, this whole person concept that you brought, how is this linked with the emotions or values or the heavy stuff? Like, what is really heavy?
Well, I wonder if heavy is subjective,
Hmm.
right? What is heavy for you as a coach might be different to what is heavy for me as a coach for another coach. And this is where I come back to the idea of who is the coach, what is their maturity in terms of their development as a human being.
Hmm.
There are some coaches, and just to be clear, I'm not judging here. I'm just saying this is just different points in our development where they do not feel comfortable talking about emotions or feelings,
Hmm.
right? And that's something that's down to who they are and how they show up in the world.
Yeah.
As we've said before, Edna Murdoch says, who you are is how you coach, or who you are is how you supervise. And so for those individuals, perhaps seeing tears might in itself be heavy. Discussing how people feel might be heavy. And they might not feel resourced or skilled at working with that data.
Yeah.
Right? I think that to go to another extreme, there are coaches who are therapists, who have
Exactly.
trained as therapists,
Yeah.
right? And I am imagining, because I'm not one of those coaches, but I'm imagining that they can hold a lot more. But they have, when I've spoken to such individuals, they have a very clear distinction between what hat they're wearing
Mm.
as they go into those sessions.
Yeah.
And so I think it takes us to a really interesting avenue of exploration, which is what is the work that we're doing on ourselves,
Mm.
right? What is the work that we're doing on our shadows? What is the work that we're doing in terms of being able to process past traumas? What is the work that we're able to do in terms of empathizing with earlier versions of ourselves? What is the baggage we are carrying? Because that's going to have a direct impact in terms of how we are sensitizing and attuning to the client in the room. From a whole person perspective, my view of that is that we are carrying a load on us, right, as human beings. And for our clients, and most of our clients are professional people, Some of that's going to come from work. Some of that's going to come from our own standards and the pressure we put on ourselves. Some of that is going to come from our family, our friendships, or community roles. So the whole person means all of that is welcome here because all of that is impacting how you show up in the world. And if you are working on developing a new skill or trying to expand your consciousness in some way, then yes, there might need to be a return for your employer who's paying for this work. But that doesn't mean that your experimentation and your building of these new capacities has to be limited to the work domain. So you can experiment at home. If you want to be a better listener, if you want to ask better questions, maybe go home and really listen to your other half or your children, ask them better questions. So for me, that's the whole person element here. But what I've found, Biran, and it's interesting because when you were talking about therapy and coaching, what I was hearing was that actually your clients are kind of coming, perhaps having already had a therapist and then looking at coaching. For me, it's typically worked the other way,
Mm.
which is that we've started coaching, and somewhere on that journey, the baggage that is more historical in nature, is perhaps deeper kind of wounding there in some form, starts to become apparent, and it will typically just be a passing comment.
Mm. Such as?
Mm. Well, a great question. A great question is, where did you learn to behave like that?
Mm.
Right? And for me, that's a coaching question. And of course, it takes the client into the past.
Mm.
And there might be a passing comment. Well, actually, something happened with my father or my mother was like this, and this was the relationship I had with them. It's like, okay. So from there we can start say, okay, so that's been a behavior that's been with you for a long period of time.
Yeah.
Okay. So we can start to work on the presenting aspects of that in the here and now and how it relates to the future. But that can be a point to say, well, actually, what have you done to process that?
Mm.
Who have you spoken to about that? Um, and then and you then enter an interesting domain. And some people just don't want to go there,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And as coaches, what is our job? Raise awareness, build responsibility, offer choice. It's their choice.
Yeah.
But we can signal that that might be important. And I wouldn't be able to give you a percentage of how many people decide to walk through the therapy door and how many don't. But what I do know is a significant number of my clients do have therapy in parallel and usually enter therapy whilst we're coaching.
Yeah.
And and I love that. I love that we're working in parallel and they're kind of working really deep at the bottom of the iceberg, past versions of the iceberg in parallel. But then that allows us to then also build on, piggyback on that work.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because as you said, the whole person, isn't it? There's two different types of work or effort that the person is putting into fully embracing who they are and where they want to go. So it works both ways.
Yeah.
Exactly. Just before we were, oh, sorry, you were going to say something.
I was going to say something. I'm curious about something, and I don't know where this will go, so I'm just throwing it out.
Okay, go
The
ahead.
saboteurs. The
Mm,
saboteurs. Everywhere I go at the moment, people are talking about the saboteurs. Have you done the
okay.
saboteurs assessment? How do you use saboteurs in coaching?
Yeah.
And I find this, fascinating, because this is us looking at those kind of inner parts of ourselves that are somehow interfering with us. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So in that, so this would be things like, hey, being a stickler, for example, being restless, having a judge within us,
Yeah.
deep rooted critic. And of course, as coaches, we often work with transactional analysis. We might talk about TA drivers, be perfect, please people, etc., etc. But the saboteurs seem to have kind of brought this into popular coaching discussions. And I know a number of people using this. And what's fascinating for me is that in a way, what is it that makes you have a strong judge? What is it that's led to you being a perfectionist? What is it that makes you restless and need to keep yourself constantly busy? And so I wonder if, as innovation is occurring in the coaching field in terms of these awareness raising tools, whether it also opens up a set of questions around what are you opening up potentially,
Mm-hmm.
and how do you keep your clients safe?
Mm.
What are your
Safe
thoughts
from
on
what?
that? Well, safe in themselves and, able um, to feel resourced, to feel held, to feel contained as a result of the things that we're opening up as a coach.
So, the moment you started talking about saboteurs, um, and I understood which saboteurs you're referring to. You're referring to positive intelligence tool. I felt a bit reaction to that in
Mm,
myself because saboteurs concept was there for a very, very long time. Like it's 2025 today. I attended my coactive coach training in 2012, and they teach about saboteurs there. And thinking about coactive coach training history, they've been teaching about saboteurs from the beginning.
mm,
So for more than 20 years. And also now that this positive intelligence tool and I just forgot the gentleman's name. Sorry.
Shazad.
Yes, Shazad. He brought it into a more assessment and maybe more digestible concept. Uh, but there is a but. I don't believe that our saboteurs are limited with what he came up with.
Mm, mm,
So there are so many other saboteurs, and some call it inner critic. Doesn't matter what it is. It is like it is a saboteur. It judges. It asks for perfection, and over time, as we grow old, our saboteurs grow with us as well. Um, they find other ways to pop up and speak with us. It is, I think, it's the sense of helping the individual to recognize what is holding them back, their inner beliefs, their inner limiting beliefs. Saboteurs are a combination of limiting beliefs and subpersonalities. So if we can help them to recognize that, does it matter where it comes from?
yeah, and my point's more, what does it open up
I think
potentially?
it opens up that conversation. Oh, where does that come from? But at the same time, I would ask myself in that coaching relationship or conversation in that moment, would it create awareness? Would it be in favor of the coachee to discover where it comes from?
Right.
Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
Mm,
Sometimes
mm,
just noticing it is enough.
mm,
And that would be the safe zone,
mm.
right? And what if the other question is, what if we believe that it would be in service of the coachee to discover where it comes from, but then our own saboteur kicks in and says, you are not equipped enough to discover where it comes from, right?
Right, right, right.
I don't
And
know if this is an answer to your question, but I just wanted to
yeah,
share.
I was thinking more just in terms of the human being, does it open something up for them? Does it potentially open up a window? Because our typical approach would be, hey, let's find your. I'm grossly simplifying here just for artistic effect. But hey, you have an inner judge. Okay, what name do you want to give your judge? Okay, the name of my judge is Tortoise. Great. Okay, what are you going to do the next time you hear Tortoise? Well, I'm going to say, Tortoise, I don't need your help right now. And of course, that can give some kind of comfort, right? That can help with some awareness, some management of the belief. The question is, how deep does the rabbit hole go? Right. And I think we have to have some sensitivity to that. Of course, it's not up to us whether someone decides to go down that rabbit hole or not. I think what is up to us is to be conscious of whether to name it or not, and to perhaps, based on our capacity as a human being, based on how rounded we are in terms of the senses that we can use, to perhaps not rush into a view that a therapist is needed, right? To back ourselves, as long as we've already said, that actually, we're working with someone who is resourced, who is able, and we're working on something that's about the here and now towards the future, and it's about some kind of growth. It's about some kind of moving forward, as we've discussed in past episodes. And I wonder if in some ways what we need to do is encourage coaches to be comfortable, right? By using supervision perhaps to
Yes,
calibrate,
yes,
comfortable perhaps stretching a bit more into stuff that feels heavy, whilst absolutely not becoming a therapist,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
So hold the messiness, hold the feeling.
So because we started with the ICF and EMCC accrediting
Mm,
bodies approach, I want to bring that in as well. So,
mm,
there are many different levels of like ACC, GCC, MCC, senior practitioner, master practitioner. So actually, accrediting bodies wants you to be able to hold that emotion and deeper conversations. When you look at their competencies or competency markers for different levels of seniority as a coach, they say if you don't hold that space, if you notice the emotion but you don't bring that in, if you don't help your coachee to discover that emotion and how that heavy stuff limits them, serves them, makes them behave, or maybe stops them from reaching their goals, if you don't do it, they say you're not at this level coach yet. So
right.
that is the difference between an experienced senior level coach and a maybe entry level coach.
Mm, mm, mm.
So I think the message here is we should have the heavy stuff, but we need to be aware of the resourcefulness of the coachee and also get support for ourselves from
Absolutely.
coaching supervisors or mentor coaches, and also maybe before everything do our own inner work.
Do our own inner work. That's lovely. Very well put. Fantastic. So lovely speaking with you, Biran. So if you've enjoyed today's conversation, as usual, please do just send us your thoughts, your reflections, like, subscribe to the channel, and we will be back. And if you want to be the next Hazel and give us a future topic or some ideas about future topics, don't be shy. We're really keen to hear from you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.